All right, so now we've done the columns. Now we need to do is actually make it so that they will distinctly change depending on the actual dimensions of the browser window, okay? And the way to do that is to actually use a media query, okay? So basically what we're going to do is for each different size, we'll have a different media query, okay? So at media query, only when the screen, testing only the screen, and when the minimum width is 600, it's basically, it's going to be kind of, it's going to be these sizes, okay? Now you're going to notice that they are all the same size, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to make a column for small, see how it has a -s, a column for medium, and a column for large, okay? And then the default, which you can see that these all have the at media. So this says basically when the screen is at least 600 pixels, this is the sizing. And then it says when the screen is at least 768, this is the sizing. And then when it's 992, it will use these. Okay, so basically at different sizes, it will use these numbers here. And so what we could do is that when it's small, I could put, 4, but then when it's large, put 8. You know what I'm saying? So so that way it'll go farther. All right. Yeah, and then the default without, so if these for some reason weren't on, but basically these will be on as long as once it gets 600 and larger. But once it gets under 600, this is the default. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to take every one of the columns, and it's going to make them 100%. Okay. Which means that basically the thing like where they'll stack, it'll go all the way across the screen. All right. Now, the other thing I did too is I did that trick I did up there where I have apply to all columns, all of them that start with this, and I just put left. Now I could just put left in every one of these, but it'd just make it a bit more to code. So it's just for the ease of writing. But honestly, you could just put left, do width and then left, float left, float left, float left, all the way down. And then the rest was what it was. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this into what I already have. One thing I did too actually was this here. I copy and pasted the HTML from earlier. Oops, this has got to go back. There we go. Just say that again. And basically it looks like this now. Okay, so it's just, but you can see that it's more or less just that same thing where it's not really doing too much. Okay. So I'm just going to copy and paste basically all of this business. Now, some things to notice about it too is that I have this here, and then there's an open and a close bracket, and then each one of these are just like they normally be written. Now you'll notice that instead of like stacking them, I just put it straight across. The reason for that was, see how it's got the opening and closing? Just again for space. So I'm going to copy all the way from here down to here. I'm going to copy that, Control C or Command C, and then up here where I have all of these columns, I'm going to replace them right here, Control V. Oh, and I also need to add this one because now they're not floating. So we'll copy that and enter, Control V. Good. So now you can see how that's going. Okay, good. And we'll back you up too. All right. So, good. So we'll save that. Now, what that also means is if you look, I have just columns written here. I don't have column small, column whatever. So I actually need to also add my little thing here. So what we'll do is we will say that this one is when it's small. I think I actually had something. Let me see the HTML here. I'm just going to copy this. So I have small. I'll just copy it. Be easier. We're going to copy all of this up to row. Control C. Rather than having to retype the whole thing, and Control V. The only thing I got to change is this one here. It's JPG, oops, JPG, and it's just cone logo because I didn't put this in a folder. Okay, and let's back this up. And this whole thing's got a shift tab, shift tab, good. All right, so boom, boom, that, And then actually these have all got a shift tab. Okay, good. Now it's right. All right, and now we'll save that. And then when I go here and refresh it, my stupid picture didn't show up. Must not have done a good job. Oh, you know what? It's cone, not logo. That's why. Cone. Control S. Control R. Good. But what you'll notice now is that as I shrink this, see how it shifts? So right at when this one's medium, 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 okay, everything's 6s, right? But then you'll see what's going to happen is it's more or less going to flip. So this one will become the 8, and this text here will become the 4. So as I shrink it, see, now this one's 2/3, and this is 1/3, and this one becomes 1/3 and 2/3. So basically, it just gradually transitions from the opposite of what it was. Okay, using this up here. So the reason we use these distinct numbers here is because, where's the stuff here? Depending on the type of screen, these are kind of the standard. So, oh, I didn't show you that too. So if I make this extra small, right? So beyond the 600, then they stack. And that is where this one here, the 100%, pops in, okay? Because when it's small and it gets underneath this, it will transition to this. So this is what we would call mobile first design, because what you'll notice is that this doesn't have any requirements. It doesn't query the screen. So for some reason this failed or whatever, this is actually what it would look like. And so it thinks about mobile first. So this is actually the default CSS that's being applied. Okay, so default is 100% across. Then when it's in small, it's going to apply these. So once it gets to a minimum width of 600 pixels wide, that's a minimum 600, it's going to kick into what I wrote here. Okay, so 8, 4, 4, and 8, which it's sampling from here. So 8 and 4, and 4 and 8. Okay, and then when it gets to, medium, I also type in another class that does that. Now notice that you type it in, then a space for another one, and then a space for another one. Okay, and those are just sampling up here, and literally you just write exactly like I have here. But at least you get the idea of how it works. And you can see it's a lot like basically the same thing as using Bootstraps. It's pretty much the same thing. But what's nice about doing it this way, I mean, Bootstrap's better because it has more stuff and it's more robust, and but what's nice about it is that you have complete control, right? You wrote all the code. And so, like, if you wanted to do not 12 columns, if you wanted to do 24 columns, or you wanted to do, only 8 columns or something like that, you want to simplify it, right? Or you don't need so many classes. You could be like, oh, I only need a large and a small, and then just have the stacking one, right? Or just this and just the stacking. So when it gets to a certain size, it looks good, but once it goes below that size, it just goes to the 100%. So you could use just this medium one and just this one. You don't have to write all of it. It gives you flexibility, okay? So we just keep the rest of the CSS such as it were, and it will work pretty much the same. So you can see here, if we look at the the top here versus the bottom when you collapse it, notice that this is taking up 2/3, and this is taking up 1/3, and then this one takes up 2/3, and this takes up 1/3, and the same thing here is the opposite. So this is taking up 1/3, this takes up 2/3, this was taking up 2/3, and this was taking up 1/3. So they flip. And if we went to halfway, you would see it was half and half, like I showed you here. Okay, so it's the same thing, same code as this. This is just actually in there. All right. So that's pretty cool. Now, one of the issues that you might notice is that if you look at this, you can see that the hello there is actually going off the page, right? So in this case, it would actually probably be getting cut off, but because of the way that I have this set up, because I have to write it into the page, it doesn't necessarily work great. So in order to fix that, I need to fix these elements, right? Because this is getting a little too big and some of these other things. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some responsive elements. So just like you remember when you were in Bootstrap, you could add a class image fluid, and it would make the image scale to the size, and you could add other things that were kind of to help make it responsive. That's basically what we're going to do here. Now I'm not going to make it super duper robust. We're just going to do kind of basic stuff here. But the first thing I'm going to do is approach the titles here. You see, like, this is cutting in. So I'm going to make it so that the titles get smaller when when it gets to a certain size. So what we're going to do is we're going to say at screen max width. Okay, so basically up to this width, it's going to be this scale. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to add that first. Let's go down the line. So basically I'm going to make another class, and I'll just put a space here because we're doing elements now. So we're going to do responsive. I'll make a class called responsive -h, so responsive header. And we are just going to go ahead and it's going to be font size. Oops, not font. Font size. And we will make it, I think we'll try 0.8 EM. Now, if you remember, EM means whatever the font is, like basically 80% of what the default font is that's being loaded up. So it's kind of like percentages, but it's based off the fonts. And then we'll just delete that so that goes up there so it's a little bit smaller. Now that's great, but that's actually just going to scale them. I need to actually make this use the there we go, use the at media thing. So it's just going to be at media only screen and max width, which means up to this size 600. So once it goes past 600, it'll go back to the normal size. And then that is actually, let's, for the purposes of saving space, then we have to add a bracket there and a bracket there, so that this is basically inside of this, right? So there's a bracket for beginning and ending. Oops, I don't need to put a semicolon there, my bad. Okay, and then we'll save that, and I'll go here and we'll hit Command R, and you can see it did nothing. But once I get to below 600, see, it did nothing. Isn't that great? Did I refresh that? Let's double check. Okay, still didn't work. All right. Oh, because I didn't actually. So I made the rule here, but I didn't actually apply it to any of these. So now I could just do H1 and H2, right? So I could write instead just write H1 and then comma H2 like this, H1 comma H2, and that will apply it to them as well. So if I did that, Control R, and then scale this down, you can see that now, boop, you can see they all get smaller, which is great, but what if I didn't want one to do that? So it's better to, instead of doing it that way, to do responsive H and add classes to specifically the ones that I want. So I could do class, and then we'll do responsive H, right? And then I'm just going to copy this, Control C, and then I'll just put it on this one and not the last one. Now I'll put on all of them, that way it's Control V. And if you look, that looked like it was like too much to me, so let's do 0.9. Well, let's try 1, see if that makes a difference. Control R. So yeah, see, 1 should just, okay, good. So now what you'll see is that basically it makes it the same size as more or less this, right? But now, instead of them having cut in, it actually shrinks once it gets below that 600 pixels. It's going to shrink the text, right? So it kind of fixes that problem, all right, which is good. That's great. Now, that works pretty well, and I don't have any arguments with that. So yeah. So you see what I did there? Basically, when up till 600, it's going to look like this. But once it gets past 600, it's going to go back to normal, all right? And you're just going to have to play around with the EMs till it looks like they're right amount. Now, another thing you might want to do is a responsive image, okay? So if we look, as we shrink this guy down, it doesn't, it's just the same size, right? To the point where, like, it could even cut into it, and that's probably not what we want. You see it's cutting into the image there. So it'd be better if it would scale. Now, you could... big. We could just straight up we'll just do this. Okay, so for this we don't actually have to add an at media because I want it to just always be functioning. Okay, so I could just again do img and just apply it to all of them, but again I think I'd rather have responsive -img. I think I'd rather be able to have a specific class. Now if I just did width 100%, that will scale. But what ended up happening is I'll show you 100%. Okay, and we'll delete the delete. Okay, what would happen with this is that well, it's not really showing you now. I think because the thing's too big. Hang on a second. Oh, I gotta actually add it to the image. So on this image, I'm gonna add a class. Keep forgetting to do that. Responsive image and Control S. There we go. And refresh. You can already see. So see how it's scaling, right? That's great. But watch, as it goes bigger, it'll actually go beyond the resolution of what it is. So the image will actually go out of size. So that's no good. So what we need to do instead of width is do max width, right? So here. So we're just going to type in, boom, it's just going to be max width. And then we're going to also, just for good measure, we're just going to put height, and we're just going to do auto, all right? And that just means it's going to automatically, which it will anyway, honestly, but it's just kind of a default. Now if we refresh it, you'll see it will only ever go to the max size, but when it gets too small, it will shrink accordingly, which is good. Now in this case, it does not a lot's being, it doesn't really shrink until the very end here, but still, you know. So that makes a good kind of fluid image, and we can apply that to any of our things that we want. So that's responsive image. We can also do a responsive background. I think I'm going to skip this, but basically the idea is you do sort of the same idea. You know, you attach a background image. Okay, it can be whatever you like. You do the width 100%, and then you could do the height, whatever the height of the image is. Would be good. You could also just put this auto, but you're supposed to put the height. And then what's different about it, also I make it no repeat. What's different about it is that you have to add this background size cover. And the reason being for that is that what will happen is that instead of trying to stretch the image like height-wise or width-wise, what it'll do is it will cut the image off. Okay? Which is what you want generally, because you don't want, I mean, if it gets cut off a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. And I can kind of show you what it looks like down here. So if you look, you can see the picture got slightly scaled, but notice that this one starts here. This one's actually getting cut in. So it scaled a little bit, but it also cut the picture off. So it both scales it and also cuts it off, so it never gets warped or skewed. And that's basically what we're looking for. Okay. All right, so now the last one is the hide image. That's the last thing I'm going to cover, at least as far as I think today is concerned. Is that the last one? Yeah, is hide image. Okay, so basically what that does is it does what the name suggests, is that it'll allow us to basically hide an image. So hide an element. So whether it be text or an image or any of that other stuff, you can say at a certain size, just make the display none. Now we can use this cleverly and do something whereby we have a picture for where it's large, and then make it hide when it's below a certain size, and have a picture that's small and make it hide when it gets up to a certain size. So in this case, I had a second image that I loaded in. So right here, if you look, inside of this, the top column here, where I have the two, where I just have this one picture here, this cone, whatever, I load two pictures. I load a logo large for when it's large, and a logo small. So I have two pictures that I put in there. Now, before I put the class in there, they're just going to be stacked on top of each other or next to each other, depending on. So it doesn't look like much. But then what I do is I add a class called logo large and a class called logo small. Okay, so small for the small, large for the large. And then up here, I do at media screen only when the max width, so up to 600, right? I'm going to take that the large logo and I make display none. So basically I make it so this is off. So you don't see a large logo up to 600. Then I do another one that says at a minimum width. So basically up until, down until it's 600. So when it goes above 600, I take the small logo and I turn that off. Okay. And what that does, basically it'll swap out the two. The one will be visible when it's larger. So all the way, all the way up and then all the way down until it gets to 600. And this one will be visible from 0% all the way up to, or 0 pixels all the way up to 600. But then once it gets past that, then this is going to turn off, and then this one will turn on. So basically they'll swap out. And that's the idea behind it. And you can see this is kind of what you would get, right? So you can kind of see how that might be useful. Think about like Actually, I could probably do it here. So you look at the top of my site. See how I have like this up here? Watch this. When I get this to a certain small, right? So I could have, oh, have an unordered list, right? But then when it gets a certain size, I could turn that off. And then have this icon instead turn on. And then this is a drop down. So that's basically how they do that. It's the same basic concept. Is you're just swapping out this, saying this one be visible for, I don't know what this size is, whatever the size is, however many pixels, right? This will be visible. But then when it's below, make this one visible and turn the other one off. Actually, you're just turning them off. You're not really turning them on. Okay, because they're on by default. And that's how that works. Okay, and so basically it adds another layer of functionality. So in here, basically what we did is we covered the how to make a column, and then how to make some elements, you know, so that you can have those responsive as well. And then the last thing you're going to do is work on this assignment. Okay, go team.